I always say, 25 years, I'm not firing people. It never gets any easier. Just having a horrible life, they're in and out of hospital, they're on and off chemo. They know the end is near. The obvious fact that for you to be going bankrupt, it means that someone somewhere is not getting paid. I think the problem with most people or most business owners is that the businesses just aren't very good. They're not a good business owner.
Do you still do any magic? Before we dive into this episode, I want to ask you to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. It helps keep growing the channel and keep getting fantastic guests like this one. Matt, welcome to the show. And we were chatting so much before we hit record, we might as well get rolling.
You just go for it, buddy. Thanks for having me.
And when I was reading your bio, one of the terms I saw was business in my blood. What was it about your family upbringing that led you to say that?
My dad owned his own business. He'd had it from before I was born. He was a first generation business owner. Both him and my mum were from very blue collar council estate background. First person in his kind of bloodline to go to university. Certainly, first person to have their own business. And it wasn't that they were pushing business on me. If anything, it was the exact opposite. They were pushing education on me. But I guess, like anything, if you're surrounded by something, you absorb it. Look, whether or not you like it is, I guess that's down to you, isn't it? But I was surrounded by my dad bringing business home. Holidays were working holidays, weekends were working weekends. So it's just something I've been exposed to from an early age.
What were the discussions like at the dinner table as childhood?
In the early days, let's say before I was old enough to kind of have my own interest in business, I was a bystander, really, a fly on the wall to my mom and dad's conversations, which were probably a lesson in how not to have a business with your wife, because my dad owned the business, but my mom was the human resources director for him, so they'd always worked closely for a long time. So I just normally used to sit, looking like table tennis, table tennis conversations of my mom screaming at my dad and probably completely overstepping the mark of what she'd be allowed to do if she was a normal employee. But I guess in that, I can't really remember what was going on 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. I just knew that business was going on and business equaled money, and I wanted money, so that was that was a kind of doors open to what I wanted to do.
You said parents pushed education on you. I'm a big believer that parents typically are conservative with a small c, and I know that my dad is his own business owner, worked as a consultant for many, many years, but when the opportunity arose for me to go to University of Glasgow to study politics, the first person in my family to go to university, it was very much like a proud moment and like that seems like a safe path. And I know that you kind of got railroaded into university as well to some extent.
Yeah, it was just a different time back then, wasn't it? On the one hand, it doesn't feel, look, I'm 43 now, so we're talking 25 years ago, which on the one hand, I can remember it like it was yesterday. On the other hand, it is almost in another complete era. And back then, I think there was a few reasons, really. One, university was very much considered something that if you didn't have formal education, you wouldn't be able to get a job in any kind of decent corporate. In any kind of decent anything. So it was a necessity, and it was also a good fallback if you were going to try something else and then need something to fall back on. But you mentioned the proud thing as well, and I think for my mum and dad, particularly my mum, because she'd always been very much into education. She'd gotten ill during I can't think her teenage years, and then ultimately had to drop out of education. So I think she kind of wanted me to go to uni for her. So there was a big part of that. But many different reasons, none of which I saw as benefits to me. But many different reasons which really probably just don't apply nowadays. And my eldest, she's 18. She's looking to go to uni now, and it's funny because I sometimes get asked the question, well, why are you not kind of talking her out of uni, or you're very anti-uni? And to be clear, I'm absolutely not anti-uni. I am very pro the quickest and best route to get to where you want to go. And my daughter has zero interest in business whatsoever. You know, I have tried, and again, not necessarily for the right reasons, but, you know, tried because that was my interest, and, you know, tried to get her into things. But she's not interested in business. She loves engineering. She wants to be an engineer. And the best way to be an engineer is to go to university. I mean, when I say best way, probably the only way if you're going to go and get some employment somewhere. So I've got no issue with the concept of uni, but, you know, I think you need to decide where do you want to be in life, and what are the steps that are going to get you there, you know, quickest, most economically, if, you know, if money's an issue. Because again, so many people who go to uni, you know, go there when they can't afford to go in the first place, and they come out of it 3 years later, no further really to where they want to be, probably because they don't even know where they want to be anyway, and 30, 40, 50 grand in debt. You know, these can't be good strategies, good scenarios.
It's living life on autopilot. And the
on somebody else's autopilot.
Somebody else's autopilot, that's right. And if it's obvious, particularly with the schooling system, like I think Blair in 1997 said that he wanted 50% of school leavers to go into higher education, which I think is just a bananas, like, cookie cutter plan and direction for people, because who's to say that there's even a requirement for 50% of people to go to higher education? Because based on what you're saying there, if the path of the goal doesn't relate to having a particular degree in a particular vocation, then why on earth are we using this one binary metric? But government institutions, they need to have some sort of target or deliverable to work towards, even though they miss them most of the time anyway.
Absolutely.
And if I go back to your story then, Matt, I know that you left uni particularly early and you managed to convince your parents that I'm going to step away from this. What was the process for doing that?
What was the process for leaving uni?
Yeah.
Well, so I'd never wanted to go in the first place, and but it was kind of one of those things I probably wasn't going to get out of. You know, I mean, yes, okay. Obviously, I could have not gone. I could have stood my ground and told my parents I'm moving out and never speaking to them again. But, you know, I think, you know, some of these more extreme measures are not also realistic scenarios. But my dad had just invested in a business. There was a chance for me to go and work in it. And at the time, it was felt that I could work in the business and go to uni at the same time, so I could keep myself happy and keep my parents happy. And I had friends who went to uni who didn't seem to do much, because, again, that was always like another stereotype of uni, that you just sit around in your dormitory, you know, getting pissed and you know, going out and reading the odd book. When I went to uni, couldn't have been any different. I mean, I was given literally, you know, like biblical tomes of you know, of stuff to read.
The reading list.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, hours and hours of lectures each day, and I mean, it very much was a very full-on, full-time thing, and there was no way that I was going to be able to do that and do work. So I, you know, just kind of convinced my parents that, you know, look, let me leave uni, let me concentrate on the work now, and if things don't work out, I can go back in a year's time. And it's just been a gap year. You know, if I'd have said to you I want to have a gap year travelling, you probably wouldn't have had a big issue with it. So let me have a gap year working in business.
Let's talk about that business then. It was a uniform business, wasn't it?
It was a uniform business. It was a family business. To be clear, it wasn't my family's business. It was a business that had been in 3 generations of family. I mean, you know, I probably didn't know it at the time, but, you know, looking at it now, it's the stereotype of a family business that's just passed from generation to generation. You know, rudderless. You know, with the wrong people at the helm, and you know, the wrong strategies, and you know, it was very successful back in its day. You know, in a day when there was, you know, probably limited competition for it, and I'm sure the founder lived and breathed and knew his stuff. But
like an early adopter succeeded.
Absolutely, and then, you know, one generation takes it on and, you know, fucks it up in one direction, and the next goes and does the same.
You know the term clogs to clogs? People talk about that quite a lot. So, like, the grandparents found something, so they come from clogs, so come from nothing. Yeah. They build a business, and then back to clogs within one generation, because it's been passed to the next generation, and they don't have the same appetite or energy.
I mean, it's normally build it, grow it, squander it, isn't it? Yeah. But so my dad had invested in this business. It was just theoretically a passive investment for him. So I'd gone into work there in the sales department. I was just a sales rep. I remember driving around in my 5-door Daewoo. I don't even know if we have Daewoo's anymore. Anyone listening to this probably got no idea what I'm talking about. And this is also before the days of sat nav. And I used to have a stack of A to Z maps in the back of the car, so I could drive around in these different towns, different cities. You know, peddling white polo necks, you know, white pilot shirts and polyester trousers, and that's where it all began.
When you went into that business, though, I know you were pretty immediately concerned with, as you said, these kind of flaws that had been maybe passed to the next generation, and it wasn't performing as it should have. And you almost got to take the reins and try and sort it out.
Well, ultimately I did, and so my dad had invested, but he wasn't spending any time in there. I mean, because I guess it was never supposed to be an active investment, and even when he saw that things were going amiss, he couldn't really be bothered getting involved. He just retired. He'd sold a business that he'd grown very over a long period and sold very successfully. He was on his kind of time out really, and I always remember him saying when I said you've got to come in, you've got to do something about this. He said, I've had 25 years of business and 30 years of your mother. It's time for a chill. But I would say it wasn't that I knew what I should have done. I mean, as much as I was probably optimistic about my abilities, I wouldn't say I was arrogant enough to think that I knew everything that needed to be done. I think it was just blindingly obvious certain things that shouldn't be done. I mean, if someone's, always walking backwards, it's quite obvious to think, well, maybe there's a better way to do this. I wasn't asking for me to run it. I was asking for my dad to come in and for him to come and fix these problems. But when he wouldn't, and he said to me, "Look, you can go in and do what you want with it because you can't make it any worse than they've done it." That was, the doors open for me to crack on, and we got rid of everybody overnight, and basically started the business from scratch. I mean the format it was in. By the time I left it, it couldn't have been. Yes, it was still technically a uniform business, but it was just in a different world.
What were the big changes you made?
First of all, the actual customer base was a big thing, because when the business was taken on, when the business was founded, it was founded on a very small number of very big contracts. So. Transport contracts, for example, Arriva buses, Metro Line. I don't even know if these names exist anymore, but doing big contracts, which are theoretically lovely when you've got them, because they give you big money and they give you stability. When you lose them, typically for a business like that, it could be 40% of your turnover, and just gone overnight. Which is why you hear so many stories of these successful businesses that have been around forever just disappearing overnight when such reliance on a single customer happens. That was a big change. Again, these weren't changes that I thought, I know I need to make this change because the business is too reliant on a small number of people. We were losing these contracts anyway. They'd fucked them up for the previous years, and the only reason we still had them, and they probably hadn't terminated us even earlier, is because it would have been so such a ball ache for these companies to go and find a new supplier so early on. But we knew we weren't retaining the contracts, and to go and win more contracts like that, again, we didn't have the credibility, the infrastructure, etc., to do it. So we had to start with smaller things. We went and did small ticket transport customers, small ticket security customers, which again, like as I say, I didn't know what I should be doing. I just knew what I shouldn't be doing. Looking back at it now, I can say, well, we wanted a business that was highly diversified, and that's what we went to build. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that I couldn't go and win £1 million contract. So right now I just needed to put some food on the table. So let's go and do some £5,000 deals. But we changed the customer base. We worked with the products that we had already good supply of, but effectively put a different wrapper around those, a different avatar, if you want to look at it like that. Because ultimately, you look at what does a bus driver wear compared to a security guard. It's 90% the same stuff anyway. Take that to airlines and these kind of things. So we went into different verticals that were all based around the same
with
kind
a
of
pre-existing product that you had access to, that you knew you could sell profitably.
Exactly.
Which I think is where, like you say, potentially they were making mistakes previously, because it might have been the bus companies had been with them for so long, they had like a set price that they were able to agree, and they could throw their weight around, and you were maybe not making any money from those deals either.
And also, the problem with what they do is if somebody wanted something, so they say, for example, oh well, we want to bring a pink T-shirt in. If no one else was buying that pink T-shirt, we needed to be able to deliver, on demand, these pink T-shirts. So, and we'd have to get them made as well. So we'd all of a sudden have to go say, well, we need £3,000 worth of stock. because we've got to make all these sizes, all these shapes. And again, that £3 worth of stock might not sound a lot, but when you say, well, then we're going to do it green, then we're going to do it purple, all of a sudden, the stock holding goes through the roof. And bear in mind, this was a business that didn't have any money to be able to do anything with anyway. So obviously, what we were doing was finding product that was already from wholesale, so we could bring it in small quantities, ideally bring it in on credit, but then just go and repurpose it for different reasons. So that was a big change. We changed the staff. I mean, obviously the culture was horrendous. Everybody, running their own little fiefdom. But I mean, it was just a complete rebuild from scratch. New suppliers, new customers, new staff, new everything. And again, this is back in the days. I mean, we're talking 1999, 2000. I mean, we just got email. We were just talking about doing this big thing called a website. I mean, this was an absolute different era.
In terms of being in your early 20s, and you said changing the staff, you obviously would have had to have a lot of very difficult conversations to let people go. How did you handle that at that time?
I guess just by gut of doing the right thing, but I guess going off on a slight tangent on that is that I always say, 25 years on firing people, it never gets any easier. I think occasionally someone is so deserving of being fired because I don't know, they've been thieving or they've been abusing people or whatever it may be, and that's almost nice because it makes the conversation so easy. But if people are just not up to scratch, or they've been doing something wrong, they just don't listen, or we need to cut costs, or whatever the reasons are, where that person's not like a maliciously bad person, it never gets any easier. I mean, yes, I know the script, I know the patter, I've been there before, but to sit down in front of someone and have to tell them that they're losing their job, I mean, the only thing I can equate it to, which is not like for like by any stretch, is I can imagine when a doctor has to go and deliver bad news to somebody, unless they are a very callous person, I can't imagine that it really ever gets any easier. I mean, yes, they might be on autopilot, that they know what to say and they know at what point that dying man's going to start crying in front of them, but you can't possibly find these conversations easy.
There's an element of you can do the reps, but it's still a challenging, stretching and emotionally draining potentially conversation.
Absolutely.
During your 3 years with the uniform business, I know you managed to turn it from making 300k loss to
losing
actually starting to make money.
To making 30 grand, yeah.
What were the biggest things that you took away from that experience that you apply now?
I think that one of the biggest learnings back then was around cash flow. We were always juggling the cash flow, and that's something that 25 years on, I still do, and I think it doesn't matter how big the businesses are, how successful the businesses are. When you've got to understand the importance of that cash management, and in that particular uniform business, I mean, yes, we'd buy stock on credit, and we'd sell it on credit, and typically we were buying it on 60 days and selling it on 30 days, which sounds lovely in theory, but the reality is that no customer pays based on the credit terms they've got. That 30 becomes 60, becomes 90 very quickly, and you're always between a rock and a hard place when you're selling a commodity, because when one of our security guard companies turns around and says, well, I've said, well, you're on stop, and they've tried to put an order in. I said, well, unless you've paid for your last order, you're not having this new order. And they said, well, if you don't supply me, I'll just go and buy it from ABC down the road. And there's kind of two conversations here. One, that's a very tough line to play, because you think, well, I don't want him going down the road, and it's also morally wrong for him to go down the road. We had a deal, 30 days is our terms, it's now 75 days, and he's telling me if I don't let him go on from 75 days and supply him new stock as well, he's not going to keep buying from me. So that's one side of it. But I think for me the biggest learning from it was, when you're selling a commodity, somebody else is always in control. Both of those lessons have carried forwards a lot. But I think when it comes to cash flow, listen, I'm obviously acutely aware of cash management. However, I'm always trying to grow stuff, and I would always stretch that cash to the wire. But what I do find is I also do my best work when there's the least money knocking around, because when we've got a full bank balance, it's very easy when someone says, oh, that's £5,000, please. That's £10,000, please. And we just think, oh, we've got the money. Let's get on with it and pay it.
You tweeted yesterday, deprivation creates motivation.
Yes.
And when I saw that, I was like, I have to speak to Matt about that. And I completely agree that when you look at your bank balance, there's a particular figure sometimes that generates a feeling inside of you that pushes you to do more activity. Or if I'm in my sales role away from the podcast, if my figures are a particular amount in month, or my pipeline for the next month's at a particular amount, there's an element of, oh, that's more than it should be. I need to do something about it. So the calls activity goes up, the LinkedIn messages goes up, the number of meetings you get goes up, and I'm sure it's the same within a business.
Well, I mean, listen, it's three words that that can be applied to so many different directions and are super powerful. I mean, obviously when I made that tweet, it was in the context of sales and a customer's deprivation being their motivation to deal with you. But you can, like you say, you can move it to anything. Whether that's deprivation in the bank balance, whether it's a customer's deprivation to be your sales pitch and motivation, whether you're deprived of girls because you're a fatty and that's your motivation to go and work hard in the gym. But I think that hunger, I think hunger creates creativity.
It drives you in the right direction.
Maybe tonight's tweet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think these aphorisms are really helpful as well, because as humans, sometimes we recognize that that's a concept. So, for example, when I'm feeling like I need to push my pipeline, I work harder, but that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Whereas when you've got 3 succinct words, we can put a label to something. Like I've been doing some sales coaching in the last 6 to 8 months, and certain phrases that I label like a prospecting sequence with, I'm able to say to somebody, well, have you done your combo prospecting on that prospect? And if they say no, or they could be like, or whereas I could be more comms in that and be like, have you contacted this prospect 3 times in the last week with 3 different platforms? And they're like, no. But if you label something, it helps humans to kind of conceptualize it.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about leaving the uniform business behind and moving into leisure.
So I left the uniform business because I was bored. I was 21 at that point, and I think, listen, I won't, certainly nowadays, I won't be arrogant enough to say I'd learnt everything there was to learn. Back then I did feel I'd learnt everything there was to learn, although when I went into leisure I learnt very quickly there was a whole lot of new things to learn, but I just wasn't enjoying it. And I think what I'd enjoyed about the previous 3 years, and that is something that still carries on today, is I like the idea stage. I like the kind of entrepreneurial cut and thrust and hustle of either identifying a problem, solving it, or fixing things along the way. But when there's structure in place, or when structure is needed, I'm not the best person to give that structure, and I just get bored. And my dad's the complete opposite. That he loves the structure, the graphs, the diagrams, all that kind of thing. Again, I hate, I like to go and wheel and deal with a supplier, or come up with a marketing strategy. So he wanted to come in at the time I wanted to leave, and it just suited. Like I said, it was never my business. It was always ultimately his business that I was working in. So I left there. I wanted to work in leisure. Not because I understood anything about leisure, but I say a 21, 22-year-old lad who doesn't want to work in leisure when you think that means that you get to keep all the money and get paid for drinking and meeting girls. So off I went to make my millions in the pub trade, and I'd recently been on a business convention in Boston, Massachusetts, which the bank from the uniform business had taken me to. Met a guy over there who was on the same conference, who was a pub operator from Bradford, and he was going to take me under his wing and rent a couple of pubs to me. Obviously, in hindsight, he rented me some absolute dogs that he couldn't wait to get off his desk, and he must have been rubbing his hands when he saw this 21-year-old idiot
green
walk
behind
from the lobby. But yeah, that was the beginning of my leisure journey, operating a couple of horrible community pubs in the outskirts of Leeds.
Yeah. How quickly then did you pivot towards strip clubs? Because that's the part of your story that I think is one of the kind of headlines in terms of you worked in an industry that people don't really know an awful lot about, but you grew it so quickly.
Probably 6 to 9 months. I forget exactly, but it was that kind of time period that 6 to 9 months to probably opening the club. pretty earlier on than that, I'd realised that something was missing. I was saying, the reason I ended up in the strip club is because I was not making any money selling alcohol alone. And that's not to say that it's impossible, but it's certainly a lot tougher when you've only got one stream of income, when your margins are limited. So I looked at the other successful leisure operations out there, and they were making money from food or from DJs, from promoters, from door entry, whatever it may be. And I used to spend a lot of my personal time in the lap dancing clubs. Got to know the managers, got to know the girls, and as it's kind of been the story of my life, decided that qualified me to understand the business model, and off I was going to go and operate it. So I hired I basically agreed to lift the manager who worked in that club. He was going to leave and come and work for me, and we found a venue in Wakefield. I mean, this is, I think we found it in late 2003. Got our license probably November, December 2003, and 12-week refit, 12-week refit, and we opened in March 2004. I'll have been 23 at the time, and the venue hit the ground running. I mean, let's say hit the ground running, all relative. I mean, we're not talking about Spearmint Rhino on Tottenham Court Road, taking 250 grand a week. I mean, it was a 8, 10, 12 grand a week venue in a tertiary town like Wakefield, but everything that I thought had been the problems, and I thought that this was going to be the problem solver for, rang true. So we were operating with multiple streams of income, much higher margins, much lower operating costs, owning a freehold, all the boxes that I felt needed ticking, and I finally had a model that I knew was ripe to be rolled out and replicated.
Yeah, you mentioned multiple streams of income: alcohol, the girls dancing,
and so the girls dancing, the alcohol, and the money that someone would pay to enter. So door entry fee. I mean, they were your three core ones. I mean, there's other bits. And back in those days, we used to sell cigarettes, and it shows how long ago it is saying that out loud.
We could smoke inside then.
When we started, we could smoke inside. I mean, I remember the smoking ban coming in probably around 2006, I think it was, and how we all thought that was absolutely going to crucify the business. But so we'd make a bit of money from selling cigarettes, and what else we did. I mean, a couple of the venues, because we went on to go and open more venues after that first one. One of them had a kitchen with a chef, but your three core streams of income were booze, girls, and door. But the good thing with the booze was the margins were astronomically higher than what they were in the normal bars. I mean, typically we'd have worked to a 55 to 65% gross margin. If it was a normal pub, we were getting 90% plus, because you've got a completely captive market where they'll within reason pay anything you want to charge them.
That's the whole. I think every podcast host can chalk out this example, but the bottle of water is priced very differently, whether it's bought from the supermarket, the gym, the airport, wherever you are. You're paying a different premium for the same product, and I guess alcohol in a strip club probably falls under that bracket.
Yep, even water in a strip club.
What allowed you to scale so quickly? Because you mentioned there other venues came very quickly after this first one in Wakefield. So after I opened that first one in Wakefield, I was spent up. I'd used all my personal money, which I had from leaving the uniform business, and I'd bought a couple of buy-to-let properties back in the late 90s, early 2000s as well. Sold those, and I'd gotten some finance from the local HSBC. So used all of that to get this venue in Wakefield open, and then I was spent up. Went back to the bank manager in the HSBC. He said he couldn't do any more, but he would introduce me to a finance broker. So I didn't know what any of this stuff meant at the time, and I got introduced to a finance broker who talked to me about asset finance and leasing, and that they could lease air conditioning or refinance equipment that I already had. So and that's what I started to do. Again, didn't really know what I was doing at the time. These guys would pop in the office and give me documents to sign, and they'd be like, right, we now own your air conditioning, so we've just paid you 30 grand to buy it back off you, and you need to pay us 600 quid a month to rent it back off us. And I didn't really obviously as time went on I did, but in the beginning I'm thinking, this is great, what else can I sell these people? You had a cash injection, but it's a problem.
Used that to raise money, which then went on to go and open more venues, and kind of collapsing those next 4 years into 10 seconds is, I built a business by learning to be a borrower in a time that money was being dished out willy-nilly. I mean, anyone old enough to remember those kind of early to mid 2000s, I mean, we just have to pick up the phone to someone. I mean, I'd be getting calls in the morning saying, right, Matt, we've found a venue that would be perfect for you to open a club in. I'd look and say, that's right, okay, we need 300 grand, 400 grand. I'd make a call to 2, 3, 4 lenders. Next day the money was there. So over the course of 4 years, I grew the lap dancing business to be the biggest operator in the UK. I mean, we had 11 trading venues. I mean, we had other, let's say, periphery bits to the brand. I mean, I had a 40-foot Hummer limousine that, was both rented out and also...
You bring your VIPs to the club, that sort of thing.
That kind of thing. We also used to travel me from club to club. We had an adult website, sort of subscription-based website. Did multiple things under the Wildcats brand, but I also went on to open an estate of normals in non-lap dancing pubs and bars. I had retail stores. I had a hotel. I had a property portfolio, but it was all built on this borrowed money
cheap credit.
No, the exact opposite. Very expensive credit.
Okay.
I mean, listen, there was plenty of cheap credit around for people back then as well, but we were in unfavourable sectors. I mean, that's why I ended up going to these lenders in the first place, really, because the mainstream banks, it's what they call reputational risk, didn't want to be involved in the strip club industry, not because it wasn't profitable, and they would even happily admit that the economics of a strip club are infinitely more appealing than the economics of a normal pub or a normal club. But their problem would be that if Mrs. Miggins ever came along and said, oh, that Barclays Bank, they're the one that funds those naked girls, it just wasn't worth it to them. So that's why we got introduced to these small lenders, and that's where we grew the business from, and taking it to our peak, or the peak of the day before the downfall, if you like. I think I had something like 180 finance agreements to 80 different lenders to multiple 8 figures of debt.
8 figures of debt, and I know that by the time the credit crunch came around, that was when things started to become a problem. So 2008 was a crazy period for many people, in particular for yourself. What did the chain of events look like to lead to a personal bankruptcy because of that amount of debt?
So it kind of happens very, very slowly, and then very quickly. It certainly did in my case. I mean, because people talk about me going bankrupt in 2008. I think we went under in, let's say, August. I think the businesses went into bankruptcy in August 2008. I went into personal bankruptcy in September 2008. But if I look back at that time objectively now, I'd gone bankrupt long before that. It just hadn't, I guess, transpired in the final events yet. But I mean, the business was effectively insolvent for a year or two or more before then, because we were borrowing money. It wasn't so much the price of the debt and the fact that the interest rates were high. It was the fact that we were paying this money back over 2 years, over 3 years, and ultimately, we just didn't have the cash flow to do it. But because it was in a time of easy access to money, whenever I kind of got to the end of the month or got to the end of the quarter and had a cash hole, there was always another lender I could go to and say, oh, can I borrow another 100 grand? Can I borrow another 50 grand? And we were just basically plugging holes. But it was my first business cycle. I had, again, was naive in retrospect, but at the time, I just felt, if I've ever got a problem, I've always got people to call to go and plug the hole. Didn't think I'd be spending the rest of my life borrowing money to plug holes, because there very much was an end game to these businesses. That once we'd grown the clubs to 15, 20 clubs, or once we'd grown the shops or the restaurants to something, that there would be a trade buyer, a PLC or whatever, to step in and take these offers. And when these were trading businesses, there was an equity position that I could have cashed out from. But when the credit crunch kicks in and these lenders no longer have liquidity to be able to lend to me, and I have to stand on my own 2 feet, I found out very quickly I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. So I mean, to put into context, how quick this happened, up to, let's say, June, I knew there was issues from January 2008. That's why I'd gone to try and find mainstream, alternative, cheaper lenders to take out these other people. But whilst I knew there were issues, these other small lenders were still lending. I spent the next 6 months getting the business in a shape that these bigger lenders wanted it to be in.
More attractive.
Went to them in June to say, right, guys, the business is as you asked me to make it. They turn around and say, listen, this thing called the credit crunch is starting to happen. You know, we don't really know what it is, but it can't be a good thing.
Yeah.
So we're going to, you know, put a pause on things. So in June, I had to go back to my lenders and say, listen, guys, there's a problem here. I can't keep paying you at the short-term rates that I'm paying you. I could pay the interest. I just couldn't pay the debt over 24 months, 36 months. So I went to all these lenders to say, listen, guys, I'm not asking you to take a cut. I'm not asking you to lose any money, but I can't pay you over 2 years. Can you give me 5? Or I can't pay you over 3. Can you give me 7? And, you know, I mean, to this day, I still maintain that if this had have happened a year later, I'd probably be telling a very different story now. But back then, all of these lenders who also hadn't really felt much pain or felt any pain before, they knew something was around the corner, but they said to me, well, we've got your personal guarantee. So sure, you've got a personal guarantee, but I've given 40 odd million quid worth of personal guarantees. I will not be able to pay you. And they said, well, you don't want to go bankrupt. You'll find a way to pay us. I don't want to go bankrupt, but, you know, I'm not going to find 40 million quid. So kind of from June to July, negotiations were going on with lenders. Ultimately, some agreed to do deals. The majority didn't, so it was going to be unworkable. And then the first legal paperwork, if you like, the first demands, bankruptcy petitions started to arrive in August. There was no point me fighting them, because if I won this one, I'd lose the next one. And that was it. So I guess in terms of speed, between June and August, that 8 week period, the businesses had gone from looking. I say looking because you put it where they weren't, but from looking highly solvent, from trading, from being successful, from lots of customers through the door. 8 weeks later, the businesses were in administration, and 4 weeks after that, I'd been made personally bankrupt due to the level of personal guarantees that I had.
For many of the listeners who, touch wood, won't ever experience a bankruptcy, what does it look like in reality?
You know, depending on the situation you've been in prior, I say it could look like a blessing. And the analogy I always give, because people always want to fight the bankruptcy because they don't want to go bankrupt, because obviously people only hear bad things about bankruptcy, and typically you would only experience it once. But my analogy always is, you've got a terminally ill cancer patient, and they're having a horrible life. They're in and out of hospital. They're on and off chemo. They know the end is near, and at the point that they die, whilst everyone's feeling sorry for them, they're probably thinking, "Thank fuck for that." This has been the worst year of my life. And if you flip that into the financial side of things, you don't just wake up one day and go bankrupt. The lead up to that happening is red letters, is lack of cash flow, is probably declining customers, is staff leaving, is all the negative things that cause stress and lead you towards that bankruptcy. And if anything, the act of bankruptcy itself is drawing a line under all of those problems. So really, when you say what's different today, having been made bankrupt today versus yesterday having not been made bankrupt, if anything, it's a chance to stop the phone. It's just a chance to stop the phone ringing with all of those problems. And I always tell this, not to say it in a flippant way, like, just go bankrupt. But so many people are, like I was, bankrupt long before the point of bankruptcy, and the amount of time that gets wasted, trying to pedal a wheel of solvency when you're already insolvent, time that we can never get back, is ultimately frightening. And a lot of the time, if not most of the time, it's better just to swallow that pill, draw a line, and then come out the other side. Look, obviously you've got to come out the other side, with a plan, with some learnings of what went wrong last time, so you don't do it again. But I don't think the act of bankruptcy itself is something that is to be feared as much as it is.
I interviewed a gentleman called Matt Smith, who's a British entrepreneur, a few months ago, and he spoke about the stark differences between the UK's attitude to bankruptcy and the US. In fact, many Silicon Valley VC funds will talk about wanting to work with founders that have maybe experienced a bankruptcy or a failure, whereas in the UK, I would use the term dirty. It's a much dirtier word that people have a more visceral reaction to when they think
Yeah.
about it?
I mean, I've heard the same comments where, you know, people say, investors say, I don't want to invest in someone who's not really gone bankrupt before. I think maybe it's a soundbite, but I get where they're going with it. That, you know, that it teaches a new level of learnings, you know, a whole new perspective on things, and that, yes, you know, you've got to have been through some fires so that you've got the wool on your back, or the rhino skin, and the knowledge and the learnings. But, you know, the UK side of things, I mean, I think we're just a very negative nation in general. You know, we always want to find something to slag someone else, you know, sort of slag someone off for, you know, whether it's a bankruptcy, or whether it's you know, whether you've done better than someone, or whether you've done worse than someone, or, you know, I think if someone's done worse than someone, they're an idiot. If someone's better than them, they're a fraudster. I mean, we're just a very negative culture, aren't we?
Yeah, we were speaking before we hit record about previous guests that have been on the show, and my first ever guest was Chris Williamson, who has gone on to do amazing things with Modern Wisdom. And I've got a lot of time for Chris and his mindset, and he says the biggest difference between the US and the UK when he moved to Austin was the level of cynicism in the UK is super high as a natural default, whereas in the US he says that the energy is like first line of cocaine energy in terms of enthusiasm, which is a positive and a negative thing potentially for some people. And I really think that when you consider that, you can see why the US produces more entrepreneurs, more startups, more people who are willing to take that chance. Whereas in the UK, even starting a podcast in 2020, the number of people in Glasgow, the local area, who were like poking fun or pushing me down or not supporting was incredibly difficult in those first few months and years to try and prove myself. Whereas I reckon if you start one in the US, there's a lot more people who are in your corner.
I mean, I think there is, whether you're taking a positive view on bankruptcy or a negative, even if you're taking a positive view, that there is still the obvious fact that for you to be going bankrupt, it means that someone somewhere is not getting paid. So, you know, I don't want to, you know, I guess I don't want to trivialize it in that fact that, you know, ultimately, you know, other people's lives can get hurt on your journey to success. But ultimately, I think there's also a decision for people to make that, you know, was this done with all the best intentions, and did everybody go into this knowing what, you know, what the rules of engagement were, or had someone been misled? And, you know, yes, when I went bankrupt, people lost many millions of pounds. You know, and for some of the lenders that I dealt with, these were small lenders, and these were, you know, potentially life-changing amounts of money, or they certainly put their business on the back foot for a period of time. But I also think that everybody I dealt with knew in their hearts, and it's very easy when someone immediately doesn't pay you to say, oh, he's a criminal, he's not paid me. But I think, you know, when the time passes and people can get a bit more dispassionate about it, they knew that I didn't set out to fuck them. And that's why to this day I still deal with a lot of the people that lost money to me back then. Like I said, not immediately. They didn't ring me up on the Tuesday after the Monday. Go, oh, Matt, you know, you had a good roll of the dice, and let's do it again today. You know, obviously the wounds had to heal.
Perspective,
you know,
time, how you handle yourself post that is very important.
And that's the thing that ultimately, you know, when you're a supplier and you supply on credit, or, you know, when you engage with someone, you've got to accept that there's positives as well as negatives. And look, it's not good that people don't get paid, but I guess without risk there is no progress, and you know, it just is what it is.
Yeah, I read from your website that post 2008 you went from borrower to lender, operator to advisor, investment seeker to investor. What does that look like?
Well, I mean, that looks like what I do nowadays, which really is taking the learnings of taking the learnings of my 20s and that kind of 2000 to 2010, and sitting on the other side of the table. I mean, it's not totally true to say I went from borrower to lender, because I still am borrower to be lender, and, you know, I'm still business operator on some of my own businesses, even though I'm investor on other people's businesses. But I guess it's really been, you know, the monetization of 10 plus years of learning, and you know, taking everything I learnt and funding other businesses, not just with money, but with the knowledge that I generated over that time. Because particularly, you know, like when it comes to people borrowing money, and we talked about, you know, the bankruptcy side of things earlier, people think that they want money, but they probably, okay, in certain cases they might want money because they've got a great business and there's a clear growth trajectory they're on. But invariably, there's normally more of a story behind it, that they want money to plug a hole, they want money to solve a problem. And as important as it may be to get the money, I think it's equally important to take a step back and see why that situation's occurred in the first place. And is there a hole that needs plugging? Otherwise, it's going to keep leaking even if you get the money in. Is there something fundamentally wrong with your business model? Can this even be salvaged? And lots of the time I'll look at someone's business and where they might, for example, I'm making the numbers up, but say I want to borrow £1 million. What do you want to borrow the £1 million for? Oh, well, I want to repackage this existing £1 million of debt I've got. I look at it, I'm like, but you make 60 grand a year. You've made around 60 grand for the last 7 or 8 years, unless something material changes, and you haven't told me anything that material is going to change, then you're going to keep making 60 grand. How the fuck are you going to pay £1 million of debt off? I mean, the 60 grand doesn't even cover the interest. And it's these situations where I can, let's say, dispassionately sit with these people and say, listen, I know it's. You think it's easy for someone else on the other side of the table to tell you stories, but I was you. I was that deluded person who either doesn't want to admit it or wants to try and do the best. But you've clearly got a decent business in there somewhere. You've got something that's making you that 60 grand a year, but you've also got something that's totally distracting you, and £1 million of problems. Let me help you put that through some kind of insolvency process, leave the debt behind, clean up the business, and then you're probably going to get 90% of your time back as well, because I guarantee you've been spending the last 4 or 5 years not running the business properly, because you've always been thinking, I've got this short-term debt that's coming due in 6 months, that's coming due in 12 months, and it completely distracts you from being able to build and grow that business. So I guess long story short, I come in to provide capital, I come in to provide advice, and really just bring my learnings to the table in a no bullshit kind of way, because again, invariably other professionals, be they accountants, lawyers, financiers, whatever it may be, either have an agenda or have a professional code of conduct to work to, whatever. I'm not saying that I'm there to breach codes of conduct or
you're more of a
with
lateral
criminal
thinker, though.
but I can tell you what really happens and what it's really like, and I can tell you it having been that person. And I guess it's all good and well listening to advice from someone, but if they and this applies to anything, doesn't it? Do you want to take nutrition advice from a fatty? Do you want to take muscle building advice from a skinny guy? You want someone who has been there and done it and suffered the pitfalls that you're suffering now. And in business, it's kind of hard to find those people, because I guess that these situations don't occur a lot, and I've kind of crammed a lot into a short period of time, and many bad things, which is really where the learnings come from.
Agreed. I'm a big fan of the phrase that you shouldn't take criticism from somebody you wouldn't take advice from.
Yep.
So when you look at seeking advice from somebody who's been a man in the arena, I think that's far more credible. What joins the gap between bankruptcy and then lending over £500 million worth of business?
As in, how did it happen?
Yeah.
So after the bankruptcy, I needed to get back to work again, and I was trying to monetize a skill set. Then I'd built my previous businesses of the lap dancing and the other things by raising capital and buying businesses. I wasn't going to be raising much capital at that point, so I just kind of needed to get out and effectively turn time into money. I'd learned how to borrow money. I had a lot of relationships with lenders, so I effectively became a finance broker. And I guess compressing the time scale here, but I went from finance broker over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 years. And then some of my old investors who were saying, well, look, we're happy to do deals with you again, that they would come in to allow me to start to build my own finance book. And I think in the early days, I probably raised 100 grand, and we went and lent that to 10 people at 10 grand each. And I've raised another 250 grand off someone else, and that might have been 10 loans at 25 grand each. And, that's probably from 2010 to now, I've just effectively continued to find third-party money, third-party investors to raise their capital. Obviously, since then I've made my own money as well, which I invest into my own loans and invest into these businesses. But ultimately built a model of raising capital, whether that's from high net worth individuals, whether it's from institutions, and lending that on to UK businesses for particular activities, but not just done it as the money, as we were saying before. Done it with some advice and some support as well.
What are the key skill sets that you have that make you such a good middleman between these lenders and businesses?
So just to be clear, now I'm not a broker don't broker anymore. So I'm not the middleman, but I guess I'm not the middleman insofar as I'm not putting a borrower with a lender, but I am the middleman in that I have to deal with investors and deal with borrowers. And
would you be happy with the term facilitator?
Well, I mean, I am the lending principal. I'm not saying it to be like from an egotistical perspective. I'm just saying that ultimately I don't now go and say right, Mr. Borrower, here's Mr. Lender. You guys go and have a chat together. I'll deal with both people, and it'll be me raising the capital. It'll be me lending it, and me taking the credit risk. But I guess in answer to your question, what makes me good at it is that I've been both of those people, or I've got unique sets of experience. So I was about to say unique skill sets like Liam Neeson on both sets of that. So when it comes to talking to an investor to say, right, Mr. Investor, give me your money so I can go and lend it to people, my backstory insofar as the problems I had and the fact that I went bust and lost money for my investors. My pitch around that is the fact that, look, I'm not smiling or trivializing the fact that these guys lost money, but they lost money because they did something wrong. Because if they hadn't have done something wrong, they wouldn't have lost money. So either they had a model where they didn't take security properly, or they didn't manage it properly, they didn't order it. Whatever it is, they did do something wrong, and therefore I know how to create a model where we can avoid those problems. And then when it comes to dealing with the borrowers, my story is very much along the lines of, look, I know what it's like to be you. I've been someone borrowing millions of pounds from my own businesses. I've also been someone who's had businesses that are problems. I've been in multiple sectors, etc. So if you can talk to me openly and frankly, then I can help you fix your problems. I can help you raise your money, and probably just be someone not so much nicer, but just someone that you would rather deal with, who you know has been there and done it, as opposed to a faceless corporate bank manager who's just there reading off a credit policy.
What are the big mistakes that you see businesses making that come to you to speak about these things?
I think business owners invariably have no understanding of the finances whatsoever. It's always frightening to me how much delegate's not the word, abdicate responsibility for finances. If I can't tell you how many times, as in the 90% plus times, I'll look at a set of accounts from a business owner, bank statements, whatever it may be, and ask the business owner some questions based on those, and they'll always say, I don't deal with that. Go and talk to the accountant. I'm not asking you granular accounting points. So these are top level, something like you don't know why that entry's on the P&L. You don't know what that is on your balance sheet. It's absolutely frightening. So I think mistake number one is people just don't understand the finances. I think people normally don't prepare to borrow, insofar as I would think that borrowing money is a skill, in that you've got to present yourself in a way that the lender wants to give you money, and normally it's best to be ready for that before you need it. And people might see that as thinking it's a waste of time. I've got no plans to borrow money. But again, the things that you need to do, in terms of having a clean accounts, in terms of having a good business plan, in terms of setting targets that you hit along the way. I mean, these are just good business practice anyway. I mean, it's not a waste to do them if you don't end up borrowing money. But I think the problem with most people or most business owners is that that the businesses just aren't very good. That they're not a good business owner. And the businesses aren't very, very good operators, and that most of the businesses I see looking for money are not really looking for money to take a good model and scale it up. They're just treading water,
throwing good money after bad,
plugging problems, looking for a bit of lifestyle cash. But I always, for me, I think the reason is the barrier to entry for business is so low, and there's not really a scale of better businesses and worse businesses. I mean, obviously there is to people like us who may analyse it more, and it's quite obvious to say that an Elon Musk is different to a this, is different to a that. But if we talk, I always say, if we talk about football, there's a very clear league table, and you would not wake up today having never touched a football, get a football and say, I'm going to go and kick a ball with David Beckham tomorrow. You wouldn't even think you're going to go and kick a ball with five-a-side people on a Sunday, because you know very clearly where your levels of ability are and who you can be up against. But that level of what should be blindingly obvious understanding doesn't seem to exist in business. It's like, I've paid my £3 to Companies House, I've formed a company, I'm now a business owner, and that makes me as knowledgeable and and experienced as an Elon Musk, a Bill Gates, a Richard Branson, and anyone else who owns a business too. And I think as well, we are. It's a profession or an industry where people don't want to go and ask for advice. Many people don't like to ask for advice anyway because they feel that it shows their flaws. But I do find if you can't play tennis, you'd have no issue going and asking to have a tennis coach, to teach you tennis. But in business, people just think, maybe because it feels simple, that they don't need to learn or that they don't need a coach or whatever. So I think the ultimately, long story, but I think the end of the story is to say that most businesses are shit and most entrepreneurs are not entrepreneurs. Therefore, as a lender, as an investor, you've really got to pick the wheat from the chaff, which is, I guess, what we do anyway.
What have been some of the most potentially unusual businesses that you've invested in or provided capital to?
I mean, nothing springs to mind that it's been a particularly way out business. I mean, I guess probably my lap dancing businesses would be the most inverted commas story type business of anything I've been involved in. I mean, nothing. I mean, I've funded most things, whether it's B2C, B2B, startups, experienced. I mean, I've been involved in some interesting situations with some interesting people. I mean, let's say stuff where I can't name drop, but I guess dealing with people that you would never have expected that those people needed money. Let's say helping multi-millionaire football club owners at a very high profile raise capital because they need that money for something, helping high profile celebrity raise legal fees for something, but let's say not things I can tell you who it is,
of course,
but that's probably, let's say, as interesting as the stories get. There's no fancy businesses that or unique business models that immediately spring to mind.
It's just interesting for me though, because a lot of the time podcasts can sometimes, and content in general, because of the nature of the algorithm and pushing sensational stuff, it glamorizes businesses that are like way out there, whereas many of the most successful businesses are very simple businesses with relatively unglamorous products that are actually profitable, successful, revenue generating and sustainable.
Well, I guess it's normally fixing a problem that somebody else can't be asked fixing for themselves. When we think about an Uber or a Deliveroo or an Amazon or all these, it's ultimately simplification and convenience at scale for people. There's no rocket science in it. I'm playing paddle tennis this afternoon at 5:30, and since 3:00 in the afternoon yesterday, I've not had a fourth man. And I can't tell you how much time I've wasted messaging people and putting messages in paddle groups and offering to pay people money and this, that, and the other to try and find this fourth man. I mean, I was about to say there's no price I won't pay. There probably is a price I won't pay, but I would quite happily pay a good lump of money to know that problem was solved. It's not a fancy business. It's just simplifying a problem that I've got and doing it quickly.
Yeah, one of the daft analogies I'll use in my sales coaching is you've got somebody in their existing state or their problem state, and then you need a bridge that joins them with their desired state or their end state. And if you can find out what business you can create to be that bridge, regardless of what industry you're in, then you kind of are onto a bit of a winner at some point, as long as it's a price that's suitable for the platform maybe you're hosting the paddle mate finding service on.
But again, it depends who your audience is, because different people are going to pay a different price for something, and it's a matter of how much you value your time. I mean, look, obviously, if there's two identical services out there and one's £10 and one's £100, then no matter how much money I've got, obviously I'm going to pick the £10 one. Who wouldn't? But if there is only the option of the £100 service, then yes, that might clear out many people from the market because they can't justify it. But for me to have said, I've just had an hour and a half of my time back and know that problem solved, I'll pay it in a heartbeat. And I guess it's the same in most business models, in most sectors. Who is the customer that you're dealing with, and if you can solve a problem big enough for them, you can charge what you want.
Second last question for you, Matt, before I ask the listeners where they can find you and connect with you. Do you still do any magic?
No, I don't. But I've been saying for bloody 20 years I want to start doing it again. I've got a few tricks in my drawer in the bedroom, which sounds quite dubious, doesn't it? But I keep thinking, when I get a day off, I'm going to pull those out and go and learn a few tricks again, because I obviously love talking to people, love networking and things, and to be able to pull out some tricks again to kind of combine with that, I think would be great. But no, I lost touch with it. It certainly didn't fall out of love with it. Just lost touch with doing it. And haven't done it since. But hopefully if we meet again, I might have a few tricks with a coin or a sponge ball for you.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I guess people that operate at your level and are so busy, it's nice to have things that are done just for passion alongside it. I guess you were at the gym this morning training, and then you're at paddle this evening. What does that look like for you?
What does my day look like?
Leisure, yeah.
I would say I don't have many hobbies. I go to the gym. Some people would not see that as a hobby because they see it as a punishment. I always do exercise that I like to do, which I think I always say the best exercise to do is the one that you like. Then you'll do it. Listen, I love playing paddle tennis. I'm not going to say I don't necessarily love doing weights, but I don't dislike doing weights. I hate things like rowing, for example, and if you ask me to go rowing, I'd just never do it. If you ask me to play paddle tennis, you ask me to do boxing, I could do it for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, and it would never really feel like exercise because it's something I want to do. But a day for me looks like waking up at 6:30, 7 o'clock. I do an hour of emails on my own. I hang out with the baby for an hour. I go to the gym. I come back from the gym, sauna, ice bath. I don't start work till about 12ish here, proper work till about 12ish here, because I still work UK hours, UK business. I'll work through till 6, 7 o'clock, hang out with the baby again, watch a bit of telly, maybe play some paddle and go to bed. And my weekends tend to be hanging out with the kids, reading a book and vegetating. I haven't got a laundry list of hobbies. I don't particularly like talking to people. I always say I'm that kind of a what's the word, like a
introverted networker.
Introverted antisocial extrovert, if that's probably the word that makes sense. That if I'm on duty, and don't say it in a rude way. Obviously, I love people, love listening, love learning, but I do it all fucking day. So when it comes to night time for me or weekend for me, I want to switch off and talk to no one. So I'm not a big drinker. I like my red wine. If I'm going to get pissed, I'll be pissed because I've drunken too much of the wine that I like the taste of. You're never going to find me go, let's go and get trashed tonight. I don't really do much. I love the business, love the gym. Want to hang out with the kids, play a bit of poker, play a bit of backgammon. But I'm pretty simple, really.
Living a good life, Matt. And I've really enjoyed today's conversation. I'm sure the listeners have as well.
Thank you.
If they want to continue the conversation, where should they head towards?
You can find me all over online. I have a couple of podcasts of my own. I've got reasonably active social presence, newsletter, etc. I'm the Matt Haycox, TheMattThaycox on all things social. My website's Matt with 2 T's Haycox, HAYCOX.com. Jump onto any of those. You can sign up to my newsletter, DM me questions, and hopefully come and listen to a podcast of mine as well.
Thanks, Matt. Those will be linked in the show notes. And thanks to you, the listener. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.